I'd like to do is give you an overview of functions. We've already kind of talked about what a function is. We're just going to kind of talk a little bit more about kind of the graphs and kind of the relationship, a couple of the things that we can learn about function and graphs. So the first thing I'd like to talk about is when dealing with a function, a lot of us have so far been used to dealing with x and y coordinates on a graph, Cartesian coordinate system. Well, one thing now when we're dealing with functions is, remember, now we're going to use more of our output is actually going to represent f of x rather than y. Usually it was always x and y. Well, when we're dealing with functions, we want to remember that for a function, really a function is a set of ordered pairs where we still have our our x values and our y values, but now what we're more going to look into representing is an ordered pair of f, and we're going to set that our y as f of x. So therefore we still have our input, we still have our output, and that still is an x and y coordinate, but we want you to start getting into the mindset of thinking of your f of x as your output value, where x is going to be the distance, left and right on your point, and f of x is going to be the x is your distance from your y-axis, and f of x is now going to be kind of your distance from your x-axis. So just start thinking a little bit more when you're looking at functions and ordered pairs that f of x is your output value. A couple other things we also want to mention when we're looking at a graph of a function is one thing what we like to call our zeros. And our zeros of our function is where when our f of x, when our output, remember when I said our output value is now equal to 0. So therefore we have f of x equal to 0. So when we have f of x equal to 0, that's what we call our zeros of our function. So you can look at these 2 points, the distance of the distance of our function from our x-axis is 0. So therefore f of x equals 0. So the zeros of the function let me just actually write it out correctly here, are when the x values are the x values when f of x equals 0, or lots of times what we also like to call the x-intercepts. Okay, so when we're doing an equation, what we're going to learn when you follow the problems, a lot of times what we do to find that value of 0, to find the value of x when we get 0, we plug in 0 in for f of x. Another thing we want to look into when we're dealing with functions is a lot of times functions are going to be dealing with like increasing and decreasing. So what we look at is we notice this graph as it's increasing on an interval all the way over to here. So I'm going to kind of just give you a rough kind of estimate here of where my points are. So we can say, well, this goes down to negative infinity and this goes down up to infinity. So what I can say is from the interval of negative infinity to negative 2, this graph is increasing. It's going upwards. So what we'll do is we'll write increasing from the interval of negative infinity to negative 2. We see there's another interval, and let's call this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll call it 6.5. Looks like it's right in there between. We can say it's also increasing from 6.5 up to infinity. Then there's 2 other ways we can describe a graph. It can be decreasing or it can be constant. Here we notice that now the graph is going downwards from negative 2 to 6.5. And sometimes a lot on a graph, also most commonly, either on a constant graph or the piecewise function, if you have a straight line where it's not going upwards or downwards, we call that a constant. And we'll still exactly between those 2 values, we say the graph is constant. Another thing we also talk about is these 2 points where it changes from increasing to decreasing or decreasing to increasing. We'll get a little bit more into some problems, but these are actually what we call the relative minimum down here and the relative maximum. And so we'll get a little bit more of these, of kind of understanding why when it changes that's giving you a minimum and a maximum. And I believe that's really all I want to talk about for at least the overview, and I'll get a little bit more into there. So that's a little bit more of overview of a graph of the function. Of functions as a graph.